What is up, college sports fans, fellow members of Mountaineer Nation? This is Coos. Welcome to another edition of Coos' Corner. Come in, sit back, relax. Let me serve you up a shot of top-shelf college football content. What's on tap today? We're talking Kansas State football with the one and only John Kurtz. But before we get into the show, I want to ask that you please hit the red subscribe button if you haven't yet. Please give me that thumbs up if you like this specific video. And if you like what I and John have to say here in this video about Kansas State and Kansas State football. Please share this out with all of your college sports loving friends. And also, if you're listening to this on a podcast platform, I ask that you please follow me on whatever podcast platform you're on, whether it be Amazon, whether it be Anchor, whatever it may be, Spotify. Please give me a follow there. I would really appreciate it. And without further ado, folks, let's bring on Mr. John Kurtz. How you doing, John?
Hey, I'm doing great. Great to be here.
Yes, sir. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to chat it up a little bit about Kansas State football.
Oh, no problem, man. I always love talking to college football. Let's do it.
Real quick, before I get into the show, before we get into talking here, I want you to let my viewers know. Most of my viewers probably know you already, or most of my listeners, if they're on podcast platform. But for those who may not, can you please let them all know where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So YouTube is really the biggest place right now. It's just John Kurtz on YouTube, and that's all Big 12 focused content. That's not real K-State specific. You're going to get Big 12 as a whole. And then if there are those out there that are interested in K-State specific content, I do host a podcast with a couple other guys called 3MAW. If you want to follow that wherever you find podcasts. And you can get that on YouTube as well. And then if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's just JL Kurtz, JL, and then my last name to find way too many tweets there because I'm on Twitter way too often, but lots of ways to content.
Twitter is easy to it's easy to get down that rabbit hole when you get on Twitter, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I find myself doing it all the time. It used to be Facebook, and here lately it's been more Twitter than anything.
Yeah, it is. It's such a great informational tool, but kind of a double-edged sword. You gotta be careful with it sometimes.
Yes, and everybody, I've got my Twitter handle as along with John's scrolling along the bottom of the screen. Also, ask that you please subscribe to this channel, like I mentioned already, and give John a subscribe as well over on his channel if you haven't yet, and go check out his content and give him a thumbs up on it as well. And also, just real quick, I'm not going to dwell on this, but real quick, there's a button underneath that you can hit called the member join button. If you want to become a member of my channel, there's perks that come along with that. You can do that and take advantage of those perks that I have to offer there. And without further ado, let's get on with the show here. What I want to talk about is a topic that I thought was real intriguing. And John, I actually heard you cover this the other day on your show, believe it or not. And that is Kansas State being a dark horse pick to win the Big 12 in football in 2022. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think in K-State circles, that's been a quiet conversation for a while, going back to really probably when Adrian Martinez was secured because, and I know some people will hear that and kind of do a double take. I think, one, there's a potential for Adrian Martinez to really take off here. But even if you put that aside, there was a lot of concern about what K-State would do without Skylar Thompson at quarterback, a guy that had been seemingly at K-State for about 15 years. I mean, literally 6. Had been there for a long time, won a lot of games, and was at least gave you competent, solid to good quarterback play. Actually, he's doing pretty well right now with the Miami Dolphins in the rookie mini camps already. But I digress. There was a lot of concern about, okay, what happens if Will Howard is your quarterback? Because Howard has really struggled. West Virginia can certainly attest to that. I remember the game a couple of years ago in Morgantown, really struggled in 2020. And there was all this thought of like, hey, man, the rest of the roster's pretty good, but what are they going to do at quarterback? Well, they went and got a kid who I think is really, really talented in Adrian Martinez. And once that happened, there's been a quiet, I don't know if like confidence is the right word or optimism. I would just say like a cautious optimism that this is going to be the best team that Chris Klieman has had by far. And I do think their first 22, like if you line up the 22 starters, I think it is undoubtedly the best team that he's had. The questions will be about depth. But they've done pretty well in the portal to address some of those issues here, especially in the last couple of months. So there have been some pieces kind of building toward that. And I thought, hey, this is going to be K-State will fly under the radar like always. And in Vegas, I'm seeing the win total right now at 6.5. the pretty long odds, seventh-ish best odds to win the Big 12 in the conference, depending on where you're looking. So I didn't think many people would really latch onto it. But last week, it was literally like within the span of 48 hours, you had an article from The Athletic where Max Olson was – now, granted, it was like a season preview of K-State, but it was all centered around a quote from Chris Klieman saying he felt like they were close to being able to contend for a Big 12 championship and kind of hyping that up. And then there was, I think it was Mike Farrell Sports that put out an article saying, hey, K-State is a dark horse to win the Big 12. And then there was even one more. Oh, Bill Connolly from ESPN, who does the S&P Plus for ESPN. He said he basically put out the same kind of message like, hey, somebody stop me because right now I'm sort of buying in on K-State being a legitimate contender here. And I just thought, man, I did not think that was coming at all. I thought that was going to be purely a K-State-centric narrative, but it is starting to leak out now. And I think a lot of it is because of that top-end talent that K-State has across the board. And we can go a little bit more in depth if you want to later on here on that. But I think the key thing there is that K-State has three players that are either already All-Americans or could be All-Americans at pretty important positions. One being Deuce Vaughn, obviously at running back. And I think most Big 12 fans are going to be pretty aware of him. One of the most exciting players in college football. And I know K-State is not by nature a real sexy, exciting program. But if you have not watched Deuce Vaughn, I would highly encourage you to go check out some highlights of the dude right now. He is a spark plug, and it's an easy comp to make, but pretty Darren Sproles-esque.
Yes.
At K-State, and he's, I think, like a fringe Heisman contender potentially this year. We'll see how that goes, but he's been great. Then on the defensive side of the ball, as a pass rusher, Felix Anudike-Uzomah, last year, outside of Will Anderson, I'm going to see if I can remember the qualifiers here, but outside of Will Anderson at Alabama, who obviously is a menace, no other Power 5 underclassmen had more sacks than Anudike-Uzomah last year. So in terms of like returning Power 5 guys, he's up there with basically anybody in terms of returning production as a pass rusher. And K-State has a lot of depth at pass rusher. I think everybody thought last year Khalid Duke was going to be that guy, and he got hurt in the non-conference schedule, missed the rest of the year. Now he's back healthy. But the other guy that's really like All-American status is going to be playing left tackle for K-State this year in Cooper Beebe, who I think is going to be a professional offensive lineman here before too long. So they have three real studs, and then a lot of guys that I think could be like first-team All-Big 12 players. I saw Athlon had like 6 first-team All-Big 12 K-State players on their preseason squad that came out today. So like the front line's pretty good. The front line is pretty stocked up. Malik Knowles is going to be on a lot of people's like all-conference, maybe all-American return man list as well. When you talk about special teams for K-State, that's another real talent that they have there. So there are a lot of things that really can add up to, hey, this is a pretty experienced team. Chris Klieman now has been around for a while. They're through what was really a pandemic lull, which was the only year where Chris Klieman really struggled so far in his career at K-State. And now the question becomes, can you take that next step? Because we've seen him go 8 wins twice. The 2 non-pandemic years, he's won 8 games. Can you take that next step to be like a 9 or a 10-win team? It appears that they have the roster to do so, but it obviously is much different when you actually get out there on the field.
Right. Yeah. And you actually touched on you segued into what I was going to ask you about, which was the guys returning. And I read somewhere, and I've always been a firm believer in this anyway, but I was reading an article a few months back about how you judge how good a football team is or what their potential is, and it all starts up front. And if you have a team that has a majority of their offensive and defensive lines back, then I think you've got a chance to have a really good football team. And that goes for Kansas State and even for West Virginia for that matter. I mean, both of those teams have obviously we lost Akeem Mesidor, which was huge, but other than that, we've got everybody back up front. And I think with Kansas State, you guys are in a similar situation, right?
Yeah, offensive line took more hits than the defensive line, but they're also pretty deep on the offensive line, and we're using a lot of guys last year. Like, for instance, Taylor Potier is a guy that they're really excited for, who was going to be a starter at guard last year and was really like the talk of the offseason and had a season-ending injury in fall camp before anything got rolling, never got to play. Now he's back, like chomping at the bit, ready to hop in there after they lost Josh Revis, who was an NFL free agent signee on the offensive line. So while they did lose a couple of guys there, they're still pretty good and still pretty deep. And it includes, again, Cooper Beebe, who I think is a potential All-American at tackle. And really with the offensive line, I can remember sitting here last year the conversation in K-State circles was like, man, in a year or two, this offensive line is going to be really good. They have some really good young talent that's developing. I think Connor Riley is maybe the best position coach that they have on the team, their offensive line coach. And I think they're very fortunate to have him there. So he's done a great job of patchworking things together in the past, even when they haven't had all that much. Now I think his cupboard is far less bare from a talent standpoint. The defensive line is where, again, I think they can be really, really good. Anyudike Uzama was one of, if not the best pass rusher in the Big 12 already last year. Nate Matlack is a kid that they're really high on that was a pretty big recruit locally that K-State was able to win, and I've heard a lot of really good things about the jumps he's taken, and he had his moments last year where he really flashed. It was just a matter of consistency, and I think there are some signs pointing to him being more consistent. Eli Huggins is one of those, like, under-the-radar studs who was a really good defensive tackle, but there's just not a lot of real flashy plays all that often from a defensive tackle, but a good run stuffer, decent pass rusher from that position as well. And he's back. That was a quiet, like, I think some people expected maybe he would just move on. He opted to come back. I think that was huge on the defensive line. Khalid Duke, as I mentioned, coming back from injury, he was playing kind of a hybrid role, and that was really what killed the defense in a lot of ways last year for a while. It took him some time to rebound from it. He had a unique hybrid role where he would go between being down, hand on the ground, and then back more as like a linebacker in coverage, but it's stud athlete. I mean, as good an athlete as K-State will have on their defense. And so you can kind of lump him in there too. There are a lot of Damian Ilalio is a local kid from Manhattan High that I've heard a lot of good things about, working his way up on the defensive line. There are just a lot of names and a lot of high-end talent there that I think that is going to be one of the biggest things. I think K-State will be able to get after the passer pretty good this year.
Awesome. Yeah, good deal. Segueing real quick, you had mentioned transfer portal, which we'll get into a little deeper in a minute. But first, I want to touch on the big one, and that's Adrian Martinez. I guess there's been a lot of, I don't want to say hate necessarily, but I think a lot of people are really down on Adrian Martinez because of the high turnover numbers and things like that at Nebraska. But, I mean, obviously you got to look at what he had around him as well. What do you think from the K-State perspective the Wildcats are getting in Adrian Martinez, and how good can he be?
Yeah, and that's definitely like the $1 million question on the season, because they have all this talent in a lot of places. Obviously, Deuce Vaughn is just potentially like once in a generation kind of talent, but they have to have good quarterback play. And Adrian Martinez at Nebraska, I mean, you'll find him. He holds just about every single record, it seems like, all time in Nebraska history, just because he's played so much football there, and has had very flashy, great moments. And I think a lot of people would tell you for 3 quarters he's been an excellent quarterback, but things have fallen apart late in games in the fourth quarter in close games. And if you think back to it, and I'm somebody who makes fun of Nebraska as much as anybody, old habits, old rivalries die hard. But if you think, I mean, the amount of close games that they have played in over the last 3 years it's unreal. I mean, every single game with them goes down to the final possession. They just don't ever win those games. So it's not like this team – I know the record has been wretched. They haven't made a bowl game since 2016. Adrian Martinez has not played in a bowl game. But they've been in a lot of these games with pretty good quality competition. So it's not like this has been totally devoid of anything. There is some substance there. And Adrian Martinez was a very highly recruited kid coming out of high school. We interviewed him for our podcast the other day, and he was talking about sitting in Ohio State's quarterback room, which would have been, I think at the time, like – God, I'm trying to make Dwayne Haskins, Cardale Jones, a star stud. Joe Burrow. Burrow was in there when he was on his recruiting visit. I mean, it was just a ridiculous. So this is a guy that was very highly sought after when he was coming out of high school. Right. The idea here would be change of pace, change of scenery at Nebraska. That's a pressure cooker. Obviously, the fan base deeply cares, and they have struggled for a long time. So there's all this pressure to win and meet the expectations there. Combined with, I think, frankly, not a very good head coach. I mean, I just don't think Scott Frost is a very good head coach. And I think when you combine both of those things, a change of scenery could do him a lot of good. K-State fans really care, and certainly the expectations are pretty high as we're sitting here talking about, hey, can they be a dark horse Big 12 contender? But it's not the same level of pressure that you're going to see at Nebraska. So I think a lessening of that and coming into a program that just got done with a quarterback very similar. I mean, Skylar Thompson had a pretty similar track record, one more than Adrian Martinez did, but not as much as fans always wanted. And there was always some level of frustration with him and wanting to be better. And yet at the end of his career, K-State had Skylar Thompson, I think, playing really good football. So I think there is there's an outline there of how this can work. The other thing is K-State has turned the offense over to Colin Klein as the offensive coordinator this year, which he was not last year. And that was you talk about signs of progress and reasons I think this program can take a step. Chris Klieman made a really hard decision. Courtney Messingham, the offensive coordinator, who pretty bland, pretty boring, honestly, with what he was doing with the offense, mediocre in terms of success. Mm-hmm. Childhood friend of Chris Klieman, and he fired him this offseason and gave the offense to Colin Klein after he got a trial run in the bowl game, basically, against LSU. So that, to me, they're promising to run a more up-tempo, more modern, basically, kind of offense. And all the players are saying the right things about it. Now, I'm a little bit leery because I think K-State being kind of the change-up to everybody's fastball is how they've won a lot of games. When everybody came out with the spread offense and Bill Snyder was ramming it into the line with Colin Klein and just slow, grinded out football, I think that change of pace really helped. So you have to have the right mix here, but I do think K-State really needed a bit of a modernization offensively. And Adrian Martinez has talked a lot about his relationship with Colin Klein and how much that really sold him. So that's kind of the blueprint, like getting this guy a change of pace, realizing that there's still a lot of talent there, and getting him healthy. He played with a torn labrum and a broken jaw last year, which is crazy. Wow. I think you start adding all of that up, and you can see at least a path where Adrian Martinez could have a lot of success at K-State. The other thing, he had a terrible, I should add this, he had a terrible, speaking of offensive line at Nebraska. It was a very, very bad offensive line. He was under pressure more than about any Power 5 quarterback last year, and I wish I had my guy Cole Manbeck here who would drop the stat for you. But K-State, as we mentioned, has a pretty good offensive line. I think that will help a lot. And so if there is market improvement from what Adrian Martinez has been like late in games, I mean, I think there's plenty of reason to believe he can have a lot of success at K-State this next year.
Number one, Chris Klieman has had great success with quarterbacks over his career. I mean, look at the guys he's put in the NFL, even from North Dakota State. Then you got Colin Klein. Who knows how to coach a running quarterback and a change of pace guy like Colin Klein, right? I mean, he was that guy. And then you add in the good offensive line play. And to me, I mean, with Adrian Martinez, I mean, like you mentioned earlier, I think you mentioned it, it's a change of scenery, new beginning, a chance to really go out and play with a chip on his shoulder and kind of prove something, that he's a better quarterback than what he was able to show at Nebraska because of, and a lot of it was probably no fault of his own, just because of the situation he was in. So I think Adrian Martinez may end up being one of the surprise quarterbacks, especially in the Big 12, maybe even in the country in 2022. Hopefully that doesn't happen against West Virginia, but I do think he'll have a good season. I really do. I think he's very underrated.
Yeah, I think the potential is there, and I'm glad that you brought up Kleiman's run of success with quarterbacks, because it's another thing I think people just don't realize about him, but his last 3 starting quarterbacks are all in the NFL right now. Skylar Thompson, who was a 7th round draft pick of the Miami Dolphins, Easton Stick, who I believe was a 6th round pick of the Chargers, but at least last I knew he was still on the Chargers roster at quarterback, and then of course Carson Wentz before that, and then in between there, the last guy that he recruited and coached for a year before he took over as the starter at North Dakota State was Trey Lance, who's now with the San Francisco 49ers. So there's a heck of a track record there with Klieman and QBs.
Absolutely. So, I mean, to me, that speaks for itself. And then sticking with the transfer portal topic, what other players did Kansas State add from the portal that you think will be impact players in 2022?
Well, I hope no Nebraska fans are watching this, because if K-State has success next year, I think it's going to be in large part because of Adrian Martinez and then Will Honus, who was a transfer linebacker, which is a crazy story. So K-State really needed linebacker depth. They have Daniel Green at linebacker, who I think is a potential first-team all-league guy, really talented, but they needed depth, and what they found was Will Honus, a former JUCO linebacker that K-State recruited pretty hard when Snyder was still around, didn't get him, went to Nebraska, didn't have the greatest career, was pretty oft injured, battling a lot of injuries, and then K-State didn't even – it was supposedly a walk-on at first. He didn't even come on scholarship through the transfer portal, but walked on in the spring, has since earned a scholarship by the way that he's played. And now I think is going to see a lot of time for K-State. And that's really what they needed out of the portal, were just some additions like that are going to shore up some holes. And they've done that in the defensive backfield. That's really, when we were talking a little before we came on, and I said, hey, in the last, I don't know what you want to call it, 2-3 months, K-State's done a lot of really good work in the portal, and a lot of that came with just defensive backs where, hey, you said, hey, we feel really good about Echo Boydo and Julius Brents, the two starters there, and I've seen Brents on a lot of all-conference teams. But where is the depth at corner? Well, they've now gone out and added multiple, like three, I believe it's 3 corners and a safety here in the last couple of months out of the portal, and none of these are like huge names. You've got a Prairie View A&M kid, which is exactly what K-State did last year with Reggie Stubblefield and had a lot of success. They went and got one of his former teammates, first-team All-SWAC guy, to throw in the mix there. A transfer from Arizona, a JUCO kid that chose K-State over Florida State. There have been just some nice, solid additions that started to really add up there. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, here is something. Gavin Forsha is a linebacker who K-State was in on for a long time, looked like they had it sealed up, and Lincoln Riley, of all people, came in at the last minute and tried very hard to get him out to USC, and he said no and stuck with K-State. And so that has been a big one. And then I believe it's Anthony Frias is a running back who K-State, again, needed a complimentary back for Deuce Vaughn. They lost 2 young running backs who were really talented behind Deuce, because you can understand they're looking at that. Right. They were not going to get the ball much. Right. But they added another kid, again, another addition that Lincoln Riley tried to come in and swipe at the last minute, and they got him in as a running back. So it's been a lot of supplemental pieces. But when I talk about, like, the program already had a pretty good starting 22, what they needed was to sprinkle in like 7 or 8 from the portal. That could really help out, and they've done a nice job of addressing those needs, particularly here late. Just being patient. I think being really patient in the transfer portal has paid off for them.
Yeah, what's funny is I hear you talk, and I think about West Virginia. There's a lot of parallels between these two programs. I mean, you look at Klieman and Neal Brown came in at the same time into the Big 12. Klieman's I think Klieman's overall record's probably better than Brown's, but they're still pretty close, right? And then you look at this season where, you said you guys got a lot of defensive backs out of the portal. West Virginia did the same thing. Some couple of JUCO guys, a transfer from Colorado State, a transfer from James Madison. So just a lot of parallels when I look at these two programs and where they are. Both got transfer quarterbacks in.
Yeah,
hoping to turn the program around. So just a lot of similarities. And speaking of portal, what research I did, I couldn't see where K-State really lost any. I mean, they lost a couple of backups, I guess, to the portal. But did they really lose anybody to the portal that played a lot of snaps?
There was not. I'm trying to rack my brain. There was not a real major portal defector that I can remember. I think very early on in the offseason, and this has been the case for a couple years now, there had been talk about, like, is Malik Knowles going to stick around? But I think the shift at offensive coordinator really helped with that. There was some talk that if K-State did not make a move there, that some of the guys they were in jeopardy of losing some guys offensively. But they made the move, and Colin Klein is a pretty popular guy, and that helped keep some folks around. They lost a safety. Again, this has been more recent, about 2 or so months ago, who safety was one of those positions where they're not very deep. And so the thought was, man, you just lost like a pretty promising young guy who had played a decent amount last year. But they, went and landed a couple other kids from the portal, and 2, it is down the list. It was more like a luxury. Hey, if you can have this young kid, it was more like a concern for 2023. Not so much 2022, but the 2023 team could have really used that young safety help. So I don't think a lot of people were freaking out that much about it for this year. So yeah, they honestly, in today's day and age where everybody seems to be losing somebody all the time, they did a pretty good job of maintaining the roster.
Yeah. And real quick, before I let you go, I want to touch real quick on looking a little bit past this season, looking at 2023 and beyond. What is the 2023 recruiting class shaping up to be like for K-State?
Yeah, so this is a really exciting and nerve-wracking month right now for the K-State fan base, because 2023, there is a really good local class. The state of Kansas is putting out one of the best classes it's had in a long time, with guys that K-State has been in on for a while. And one of the storylines of the Klieman era has been a lack of success actually locally recruiting-wise. Some of their biggest hits have been, like Deuce Vaughn, for instance, from Round Rock, Texas, right in the shadow of Austin. They've had to go other places. They've missed out on some pretty big classes, particularly the 2020 class after Klieman had first come in. There were a lot of great players there that K-State basically was the bridesmaid to. and didn't actually haul him in, and fans have been frustrated about that. Then this past year, Jaron Kanek was a huge recruit who wound up going to Oklahoma, had been committed to Brent Venables at Clemson, followed him to Oklahoma. K-State finished second in that recruitment. And, that was a really frustrating thing. So everybody's saying, like, when are you going to get over the hump locally? When are you going to get over the hump locally? Well, the number one player in the state right now is Avery Johnson. I guess it's debatable, and they're in on both of the top two. But Avery Johnson, a 4-star quarterback. He's an Elite 11 quarterback. He just made the Elite 11 finals from Mays, Kansas. And K-State has been in on him for a long time. All the recruiting gurus would tell you they're in a really good spot right now, but Oregon seems to be the primary competition. And Oregon, his 3 visits that he's taken, Washington, which he took this past week, then he's visiting K-State this weekend. Then after that, it'll be Oregon. Oregon was in on Anthony Rashada, who was one of the biggest high-profile recruits across the country. Now it looks like he's headed to Texas A&M, and NIL may be really involved there. And so Oregon suddenly seems to be in much more dire need of a quarterback, and now that produces obviously some real competition for not only someone that would be a huge win from hey, let's get a quarterback of the future, but more a statement. Like, we can go land this local kid that is a star and is the big guy, and then also is very good friends with Dylan Edwards, who's a high-profile 3-star running back that has an Oklahoma offer. Joe Otting, an offensive lineman who has a Notre Dame offer from the state of Kansas. There's even Joseph Randall, whose older brother played at Kansas and was a really good player. Some people think he's the best player in the state. 4 stars, taking a visit to Texas. He just visited K-State all of a sudden last week out of nowhere when they thought K-State wasn't really involved in that recruitment. So now it's like, hey, all these dominoes could fall. You could land a really good local class and just make a big statement here. At the same time, we're talking about having a big year on the field in 2022. So it's an exciting but tense time right now as K-State fans kind of like wait this out. I think there's a lot of earned pessimism about how this goes because it typically has not gone very well. But there's a feeling like this staff really could be turning the corner right now. So that's cross your fingers. You got to cross your fingers right now for how the month of June goes, because I think we'll know on most of these kids by the time the month of June is done.
I really appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to seeing how the 22 season does end up for Kansas State, and also how this 2023 recruiting class shapes up for you guys as well.
No, absolutely. I think you made some really good points about the similarities between the two programs, and I think you definitely know, and anybody that watches my channel knows, like, I have a lot of respect for West Virginia and really love, like, I just genuinely enjoy having West Virginia in the conference because it was such a new experience for me to go to West Virginia. And I covered the games in 12, 14, 16, and 18. So I got to experience Morgantown quite a bit, and it was just such a unique trip from everywhere else in the Big 12. Unique fan base, unique atmosphere, very cool atmosphere. I love the fact that West Virginia's been added to the Big 12. I do think there are a lot of similarities. Neal Brown was a candidate at K-State, obviously, for that job too. So I've always had a keen interest in what he's doing. And you're right, the records are pretty similar between he and Klieman. And then, honestly, Neal Brown's outcoached Chris Klieman a couple of times. Blew him out in 2020, and with a worse team in 2019, came in Manhattan and won. So I've always kind of like quietly rooted for Neal Brown, I would say. And I'm excited. But JT Daniels, man, makes the league so much more interesting and more exciting, and what's a really wide open year this year. So I know there's been a lot of hype with West Virginia. I'm long way of saying I'm very excited to see what happens with both of our teams coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be should be an exciting year for both programs and for the Big 12 as a whole, because I definitely think there's going to be an opportunity for some other teams to step up and contend for a conference championship versus, obviously last year we saw Baylor and Oklahoma State, but I think this year there may be even more teams in that conversation later into the season, hopefully. So we'll
I agree. I mean, it's as wide open as that. Like, when was the last time, at one point the Athletic had Oklahoma out of its preseason top 25? Now that is not the case anymore, but when was the last time we could say that, that Oklahoma was being thought of like that? And that just underscores how wide open the league's going to be this year.
Exactly. Well, John, listen, man, once again, I really appreciate everybody. Please go check John out. He's on Twitter at JL Kurtz. Go check him out on YouTube. And you also have a podcast again, John, is that right? Remind us where that's at.
Yep. So 3MAW, 3MAW. If you want to go check that out, it's like EMAW, like we say as K-State fans, with a 3. You can go check that out on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcasts.
Okay. I didn't realize it was on YouTube. I thought I'll have to go check that out.
Yeah.
Okay. Good deal. Well, everybody, once again, if you're listening to this on a podcast, please follow my channel. Also, check out the 3 Mile podcast John speaks of on YouTube here. Please subscribe. Press the like button for us. Check out both of our channels. Support us financially if you can. And just help us continue to do what we love to do, and that's talk college football. And with that, I'm going to let John go eat dinner.
Hey, I appreciate you having me on, man.
Absolutely. I appreciate your time. Have a good night.
You too.